everybody. I'd like to bring this meeting to order. My name is Tom Finkelpearl. I am the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, and I am the co-chair of the Mayor's Commission on Art, Monuments, and Markers. So I'm going to give a little introduction. We're going to get to the testimony quite soon. But actually, before I introduce the Commission and what we're up to, I'd like the commissioners who are here to introduce themselves. So if we could start on this side with Harriet Senni. Thank you very much.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
No, actually, and this is something for everybody, the acoustics in here are quite not great, let's say. So you have to speak right into the microphone for everybody who's testifying.
Is that better?
Okay, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Harriet Senni. I'm the Director of Museum Studies at City College. Also teach art history at the Graduate Center. I've written a number of books about public art, memorials, and controversy. And recently, after the last election, I started an initiative called Teachable Monuments because I was thinking that all these works in our public spaces would be a good place to start conversations from individuals in different silos. Certainly, I didn't expect them to be as passionate as they have become.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Calvelli. I'm the Executive Vice President for the Wildlife Conservation Society. We run the 4 zoos in the aquarium here in New York. I currently serve as chair of the Cultural Institutions Group, which is an organization that brings together the 33 organizations that are on city land and in city buildings. I am very proud Italian American and vice chair of the National Italian American Foundation. Thank you.
And I'm, again, the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, Tom Finkelpearl, but I also wanted to say that I do have some background in public art. I ran the city's Percent for Art program for 6 years in the 90s and wrote a book called Dialogues in Public Art based on that experience.
Morning, I'm Justin Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Public Design Commission. The Design Commission is the part of New York City government that has jurisdiction over the review of public art, public buildings, public space here in the city. It was formerly known as the Art Commission, so some of you may know it by that name. So we have 11 commissioners, people from different disciplines and backgrounds that are responsible for evaluating the works of art and monuments and markers. My background is in architecture and urban design and have worked across the city looking at our public spaces.
Good morning. My name is Mabel Wilson. I'm an architectural designer and scholar. I am a professor of architecture at Columbia University. I'm also the associate director for the Institute for Research in African American Studies. My primary work deals with race and space, and my most recent book was Begin with the Past, building the National African American Museum, and I'm currently one of the design team for the Memorial to Enslaved Laborers at University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Good morning. My name is Amy Freitag. I'm Executive Director of the J.M. Kaplan Fund. I am also previously head of the U.S. program for the World Monuments Fund, based here in New York City. Formerly, I was Deputy Commissioner for Capital Projects for the New York City Parks Department, which works on public art and historic preservation projects citywide, as well as all playgrounds, ball fields, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to give a brief introduction. Following that, we're going to have a format where people will be able to come up. We're going to ask people to come up in threes. You'll sit over there. There's a timer here. Each person gets 3 minutes. We will be here until everybody who wishes to speak has spoken. That took a long time in Manhattan, 4.5 hours last week. We do not expect it to take as long today because fewer people have signed up, but everybody gets a chance to speak. Let me give a little introduction to what we have been up to. I mean, the first thing to say is that controversies around public art and monuments is not something that just happened this year or last year. And I'll just give one example, which is a work of art that was placed in front of City Hall in 1922 and immediately became controversial. It was called Civic Virtue. It depicts a man standing representing virtue and some women at his feet representing vice. This is an allegorical figure. By the time it was put up in 1922, there had been a lot of work around suffragette, the women's right to vote. So there was a fervor around it. It was controversial in Manhattan until the 1940s. It was moved to Borough Hall in Queens, remained controversial for a period of time, was moved again to Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. So I just wanted to say what we're talking about is important, it's emotional, it's not 100% a new thing in New York City. It's also not something that's just happening in New York City. There have been controversies around public art throughout the United States. I don't have to go too deeply into that. I think people are quite aware. There is the Charlottesville monument on the left there to Robert E. Lee. On the right, on the screen, is an image of Frank Rizzo, a mayor of Philadelphia, which has become a controversial issue in that town that they are talking about in quite a bit of depth right now in Philadelphia. The charge of this commission, this is the Mayor's Advisory Commission on City Art Monuments and Markers, will advise the mayor on issues surrounding public art and historic monuments and markers on city-owned property. I want to make sure everybody understands that. There are some markers and monuments in New York that aren't on our property, and so we're not talking about those. We don't have jurisdiction. And secondly, we're not talking about street names or school names or anything like that, just monuments and markers on city property. And by the end of the year, this calendar year, the commission will propose non-binding guidelines to advise the city how the city should address monuments seen as inconsistent with the values of New York City. Okay, so what is a monument and a marker? A monument is something like the Joan of Arc monument there on the left on the screen. And then a marker, there is a park name for a very popular principal of a school out in Queens, and that's the marker. Okay, so what we're talking about here is a process that sort of is put on top of another process. So let me just explain. Right now, this commission, and this is about half the commission, or a third, will make a series of non-binding recommendations. Those recommendations will be sent to City Hall, essentially, and the mayor, meaning the administration, will then make that into policy. And that policy will be for, in general, all monuments in New York. Like if a controversy comes up in 10 years, hopefully these policies will still be in place. Then let's say there is a work of art, let's say it's in a park, and there's some alteration to that work of art, then the agency will make a recommendation. The agency being Parks Department. We have a representative from Parks Department here, and that agency will go forward and go through what is the normal process, which includes then a community board meeting and review by the Public Design Commission. The Public Design Commission, which is led by Justin, has been around since the 19th century. That is not changing. There's a process already in place. The process we are talking about is the process that would precede going to the Public Design Commission. Okay. All across America, there have been jurisdictions wrestling with these problems. I mentioned that before. Many of these jurisdictions have actually done quite similar to what we've done, which is appoint a blue ribbon commissioner or committee to make recommendations. So these are just some of the cities around America who have done that, or discussing monuments. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the discussions, the words that keep coming up in our discussions. These things have to do with historical accuracy. How do you get to the bottom of what the history of a particular person or particular site? Participation. How did people participate? Who got to participate? What is a participatory process? Inquiry into power. Who has the power to put something up or to question something? Complexity. There's a lot of complexity in a lot of these monuments, and a lot of appreciation on the commission for the idea of complexity, that we shouldn't make the history of New York into something quite simple if it is quite complex. Inclusivity, which is we want public spaces to be inclusive of all people, and possibility for the future, which is both the idea of doing something new, a new monument. What are the new monuments that we need to have or should have in New York City? Here are some of the guiding principles, and everything is 100% in draft form right now, but these are 4 things that this commission has been talking about a lot and has come up a lot, where again, this is our 4th meeting. And those have to do with, okay, we have, by the way, another commissioner just arriving who will be seated in a second, and I will introduce Audra, and you can introduce yourself once you get settled, okay? Audra Simpson is joining us. Okay, so these 4 draft guiding principles are inclusion, again, the capacity for all New Yorkers to feel welcome, historical understanding, respect for the commitment to in-depth and nuanced histories, complexity, again, I mentioned that before. There are many different layers and narratives around the city, and the stories that we tell ourselves keep changing. That's part of the complexity. And then that whole question of power, like who has the power to put up a monument or take down a monument, et cetera. With that, I will take a brief break. Audra, are you settled enough to introduce yourself? Okay, Audra Simpson, another commissioner.
Hi there, my name is Audra Simpson, obviously not a master of the D train. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm a professor of anthropology at Columbia University, and I'm a scholar of indigenous politics, history, and settler colonial societies.
Thank you very much, and you're on time to hear everybody, and what I've been doing the introduction, you have heard before at other boroughs. Okay, now what we also want to say is that when the commission talks about additive, there are lots of different ways to add something to the site. People keep talking about plaques, which could be part of the result, but there are also this idea, for example, there's an artist named Edgar Heap of Birds who has been going around one of his projects in American communities for years and years, and letting people know what is the indigenous nation that inhabited that particular place historically. New monuments. This is a Harriet Tubman monument that was commissioned by the Percent for Art program of New York City up in Harlem. There is a woman who is the artist in residence at the Department of Sanitation. And what she's done, this is a garbage truck covered with mirrors in the upper right there. The idea being that in a way, in honor of the workers of New York City, the sanitation workers, she's been doing a major project over many years saying that mirrored garbage truck shows you yourself. That's not their garbage, that's your garbage. Just things like that. There are counter-narrative institutions. There are, an example of that could be a new institution in New York City, which it considers itself to be a monument, is the Museum of Jewish Heritage down in Battery Park City, which calls itself a monument to memory of the Holocaust. There's new education projects. There's an artist named Paul Ramirez Jonas who did a public dialogue in many different cities where he asked people to talk about public space and put their words up in large in public. Okay, we're getting close to the end of my introduction. So if everybody gets ready, the idea here, every speaker will get 3 minutes. If you have written testimony, you can't get through your testimony, please, you're going to hand that off to Nadia Alokta, who is right over here, our staff member. Nadia will take it. The other thing to say is if you have friends or family members or whatever who couldn't make it today but still want to weigh in, we do have an online survey. The online survey is nyc.gov/monumentscommission. We have had over 2,000 people get online and give their opinions that way. So, and then this is maybe a little bit difficult to read. These are the 5 borough hearings. Today, obviously, is the second to the last. Tomorrow is Staten Island. We're going to be at room 125 in Borough Hall at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and that'll be the final one of our public commission hearings. Okay. I will now call the first panel, and it's Michael Benedetto, Jose Vega, and J.C. Hallman. If you could please come up to offer your comments. Oh, right over here. Yeah, this is the table on the left. Also, I would like to say that we have a transcription service, a CART transcription. I'd like to thank our transcriber, who is sitting over here on your right, my left. Okay, we'll start with Assembly Member Michael Benedetto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we welcome you to the Bronx. We're very happy you're here today. I will try to be extremely brief. You have been around this city and you have probably heard everything that can be said on this particular issue. And I certainly will not present anything you haven't heard already. The discussion we're having today, and you've been hearing for the several weeks you've been having these hearings, is an important discussion. There are important issues to talk about, okay? They are complicated. but I hope you employ common sense in your deliberations and your final appeal. How do we rate people who we have put up a monument for? How do we judge them? Do we take down, for instance, a statue of George Washington because George Washington was a slave owner? Okay, do we take down any monuments celebrating the life of Thomas Jefferson? Okay, the altar of our Declaration of Independence. General Sherman in World War II destroyed a whole swath of the state of Georgia. Do we take down the monuments to him because of that? Or Ty Cobb, the great baseball player who was also a notorious bigot. We must take things in context. Christopher Columbus, for instance, was a great man in what he did in venturing forth in his discoveries. That's what the Columbus statue, for instance, celebrates. It certainly does not condone, or it certainly does not celebrate his treatment of Native Americans. Certainly a vile thing. But we put things in context and we celebrate people for accomplishments that they have made. What we must do, and I say this too as a teacher, a former American history teacher, we must teach history. Great men are not perfect. Great men do terrible things during the process of their greatness. And in the cases of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and General Sherman and Christopher Columbus, they did terrible things. But that's not why we put up statues for these people. And that must be recognized, and that must be taught in schools, that for every person we celebrate, there might be another story there, and we can't deny that other story. Please consider those in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jose Vega.
Can I start?
Yes, you can. Please speak directly into the mic. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you, Assemblyman, for those comments, but I'd like to warn you to be careful not to give these commission some ideas on what to do. God forbid they dismantle the George Washington Bridge because he owned slaves. But on a more serious note,
if I may interrupt, I'm sorry. So please, no clapping during this is a hearing format, so if you want to applaud, you just do this, but we ask you not to clap or boo. Thank you very much. Continue.
But on a more serious note, the majority of people who want to take down Columbus' statue don't often know why there's a statue to begin with. Yes, it's because the Italians came here, and yes, it's because they were persecuted and they wanted somebody to show of Italian pride. But many people in this room who want to take down Columbus probably don't know that the original people who wanted to take down Columbus' statue was the KKK. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan. People probably didn't know that. I'm with the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture, but I'm also a Bronx citizen. I live right off of Jerome Ave. I built an astrolabe. It's one of Columbus's tools that he used on his voyage to America. When he got to the mid-Atlantic ridge, his compass started going crazy, and his crewmen wanted to throw him off, but he said, Polaris, the North Star is right there. What are we scared about? My astrolabe is right. And he was right. He made a discovery right there without even getting to the New World. None of you know that, though. None of you are not going to know that if you only read what's going on today. You have to do actual research. I'm also an educator, just like the assemblyman here, and I do believe in teaching actual, accurate history. Columbus was a man who made discoveries. We don't even really know what he looks like. There's only paintings and a statue. So why did we put a statue up? Because it's not to show who Columbus was altogether, it was to represent his achievements and discoveries. And frankly, if something productive should come out of this committee, it should be to look at Gouverneur Morris's grave. He's buried up in St. Anne's Church on 138th Street in St. Anne's Ave. That man penned the Constitution and wrote the words, "We the people of the United States." Nobody will disagree with you if you wanted to restore that or even put up a statue of him, because he so passionately fought against slavery. None of you know that, though. Gouverneur Morris fought against slavery, fought for the rights of those who came to this country unwillingly. That's what should be done. That's something productive that should be done out of this committee. Even if you guys do nothing, I will consider that more productive than taking something down. And I do believe in the accurate portrayal of history. And I do believe in making discoveries and teaching. And that's what I do. I teach. I teach by doing what Columbus did. Not by hearsay, not by misconceptions, not by this, not by that. It's all BS. It's just white noise. Sexist, bigoted, it doesn't matter. We don't remember people by their bad. We remember them by their good. The people who make history are often imperfect, but they do perfect things. You can be mad at me, you can shake your head, you can do whatever the hell you want. But I know what I'm saying is right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is J.C. Hallman, please.
Hi, my name is J.C. Hallman. I'm the author of a...
Can you speak directly into the mic?
I'm the author of a piece about J. Marion Sims for Harper's Magazine this month. And I've spoken to the committee a couple of times, so I'm going to try to keep my comments brief this time around and speak more broadly about the issue of context, which has come up in a couple of the meetings that I've heard people arguing that adding history or maybe creating an app might solve the problem. Well, the truth is that already exists. In 1996, the Parks Department, under the leadership of Henry Stern, began a process of creating historical markers for all of the city's monuments. And over the next few years, brief contexts were created for all of the markers. So that already exists. And it didn't work. You don't see people walking down the street, walking past a monument and saying, oh, that's interesting, and then looking it up on their phone. It just doesn't happen. So I would say that if that is the suggestion that from the commission, that would wind up failing, just as the current contexts have already failed. And in the case of J. Marion Sims, the historical context has turned out to be full of flaws. Now, the reason that context has been full of flaws is because the Parks Department doesn't have the resources to create to fully investigate the histories of everyone who has been memorialized. And I think that ultimately is the point that I would like to make. That what should happen is a question of resources. And I think that the commission should be making two suggestions. First, that we should see the statuary of New York City and furthermore, statues all across the country as fluid. History is fluid. History changes as we learn more. Bronze is not. And so the first suggestion should be that it is okay to curate your collection of statues in the same way that it would be to curate a collection in a museum. There's no reason why that can't be the case. And second, I think there needs to be some kind of ombudsman figure who represents, on behalf of the city, but also on behalf of the people, whether a history is truly problematic. I don't think it should or can necessarily fall to the public to rise up and complain. I don't know that putting that burden on them is reasonable. And what would make more sense would be if the Parks Department were given, or the Public Design Commission, were given the resources to create a position of someone who can evaluate the history on behalf of the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next three up are Lynn Speed, Joseph Medea, and Howard Urov. Okay, we could go right to left. If you'd like to hand the mic. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you on this important matter, the matter of the role and management of monuments in our city's public spaces. Let me begin by stating that the role of public monuments in our city's public spaces is to celebrate origins, inform people, and capture important historical information. Monuments demonstrate a community's symbolic honoring of events and/or people for qualities that it finds indispensable to its identity and its reason for being. For example, Christopher Columbus is honored as the greatest explorer by having had the courage, knowledge, and skills to sail across the then unknown Atlantic Ocean and founded the Americas, that is, North America, Central America, and South America. In other words, the New World. The factor that the city must consider when reviewing an existing monument is to fully understand and explore why the monument was installed in the first place. This means avoiding books or documents from 20th and 21st century revisionist authors, avoiding documents from people of the left, and resisting the need to be politically correct. The city officials must go to authentic documents gleaned from the city registers and public and private libraries. The internet, in particular, should not be used for any determination because it is tainted with many inaccurate documents which occur because it is, after all, an open architecture and it is vulnerable to being hacked. The President Christopher Columbus controversy highlights the absolutely critical need to be as accurate as possible. An example of the wrong assertion is the genocide claim. It is a total myth and an outright lie. Columbus did not genocide anyone. It is both sad and stupid that people actually believe these false premises without double-checking the fact with actual and unadulterated sources. The revisionists are using the book titled A Brief History of the Destruction of the Indies by Las Casas to make history-deficient people believe this nonsense. The answer is that all genocide occurred after Columbus was out of office. The fact is that Columbus protected the natives from the abuses of the Spaniards. So once Columbus was gone and Queen Isabel was dead, it was the corrupt Spaniards who later on took the opportunity to inflict genocide upon the natives. Now you see the history context, which needs to be carefully extracted and fully understood before any decisions are made about a monument. Many of New York City's monuments are undeniable signs of our great city's history, of what has been done and suffered here. Now you must carefully and objectively consider whether or not the removal of any monument could be a form of historical denial.
Thank you, sir. And just to be clear, you're Joseph?
Medea.
Medea, okay.
M-A-D-I-A.
M-A-D-I-A. Joseph just
I
spoke.
have my text here.
And the next will be Lynn Speed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the commission.
Can you speak directly into the mic? The
Yeah,
acoustics are
okay, can
terrible.
I be
Thank
heard
you very
now?
much.
Okay.
Thank you.
I work with the Schiller Institute, and I want to begin by saying that in the recent period, we have seen a vicious international assault being waged on history as a whole. During the Iraq War, the United States allowed the entire Baghdad Museum with historic artifacts to be ransacked. In Syria, more recently, we've seen the destruction of precious historic monuments in cities like Palmyra, some of these by ISIL, and others, the beheading of statues and so on, some of these dating back over 3,000 years. In Timbuktu, in Africa, we saw the precious manuscripts, some from dating back to 500 AD, destroyed by networks there and destroying with them the actual, much of the true history in that region. Now we see well-financed groups like Antifa, financed by people like George Soros and others, targeting statues of Abraham Lincoln, and especially Christopher Columbus. We had here in the city, of course, 3 major defacing of statues in Yonkers. Just outside the city, the statue was beheaded. The Columbus statue in Central Park and in Columbus Circle were painted with red paint, and of course also the defacing of the statue in Queens. So I am here to say that this issue of Columbus is absolutely not an issue simply for Italian Americans. It is an issue, as several people have already addressed, of the problem of historical ignorance being exploited and actual true history, including the history of the development and discovery of mankind, being eradicated. The truth of the matter is that Columbus was part of a conspiracy that involved of the Renaissance, that involved revolutionary breakthroughs in culture, art, navigation, and science, which made the discovery of America, which was seen as a furtherance of the best ideals of humanity throughout the world. This involved the Africans, the Chinese, and many others. In 1892, when the statue of Columbus was erected in Columbus Circle for the 400th anniversary, it was seen as a symbol for all immigrants that came to America for a better life. There was a huge concert celebration at Carnegie Hall, sponsored by the National Conservatory of Music, and it featured Dvorak. It also featured Mr. Higgins, who was the first director of the first African-American regiment during the Civil War. So this is the true history of Columbus, not the despicable lies that we've had retailed by Antifa and other well-financed organizations. Thank you.
Okay.
I
All right.
also have some written material
Yes,
that
thank
I
you very
can
much.
share with you.
Yep. So you could hand off, Nadia, who's behind you, could take your written testimony. Howard, Euro.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Howard Charles Euro, and I want to say that I'm speaking in my purely personal and private capacity this morning, and not as part of historic preservation teams on certain projects around the city. I'm a Bronx native, grew up in the University Heights neighborhood, just north of this neighborhood, and attended one of the last graduating classes at New York University's famous Uptown campus. As you know, the Stanford-wide masterpiece at the old NYU campus, which is a New York City, New York State, and national historic landmark, includes the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. And I'm here this morning to express grave concern that the removal of busts and plaques from the hall in August may very well have violated rules and regulations, not only of the Hall of Fame itself, but of Bronx Community College, of the City University of New York, of the State University of New York, and of various municipal, state, and federal regulations concerning the alteration or removal of material. As you know, the site was altered with the precipitous overnight removal of the busts and plaques of Generals Lee and Jackson. And I think that I want to speak this morning to the violation, in my opinion, of the rule of law and due process of law in the removal, respective or irrespective of one's concern about the substance of having Lee and Jackson in the hall. I would argue for the return of the busts and the plaques, in very brief, my view of history is that history, yes, is inclusive, which means that we don't take away from, but acknowledge history as is given to us and perhaps add to that heritage. So again, just to summarize, I intend and I have begun a process of administrative and possibly judicial review of the removal of those busts and plaques. And I hope that the Commission will be cognizant in its findings in its report of the kind of precipitous removal of historical markers, monuments, and so on that the issue of the Hall of Fame raises. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I don't actually, we're not in a back and forth, but I do want to clarify one thing, that those removal of those, the Hall of Fame in the Bronx, that's not on city property. So that's not under the purview of this commission. But thank you for your testimony. The next three are Linda Hardwick, Gregory Razzano, and Tariq Shahid. Okay, are you on the left? This is Linda.
Yes.
Linda Hardwick. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
No, you got to
Can you hear me?
Right into the, yeah, there we go.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to submit my testimony today regarding the statue of J. Marion Sims, which sits on the edge of New York City's Central Park at 103rd Street and 5th Avenue. This location is in the heart of East Harlem, a culturally diverse neighborhood. It's also across from one of the greatest medical institutions in the world, Mount Sinai Hospital and the New York Academy of Medicine. So who was Marion J. Sims? According to Wikipedia, he was a physician and a surgeon and is considered the father of modern gynecology. The way he became this father was by experimenting on African American enslaved women who did not, and more importantly, could not, give their consent to his experiments. The surgeries he performed on these women were extremely painful and were performed without anesthesia. Although anesthesia had recently become available, Sims did not use any anesthesia during his procedures on Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, the only three of the women he referenced by name in his notes, although he performed surgeries on many others. Despite the evidence of his eyes and ears, he believed that Black women did not feel pain as white women. Aside from the pain, these surgeries also subjected the women to the risk of infection. The enslaved woman Anarcha nearly died and was described in being in great agony from the surgery and from septicemia. Sims was rewarded for his experimentation. He became the patron of the wife of Napoleon III. Oops. So we have four choices. Leave it there as is, which would be irresponsible. Leave it there with a plaque explaining what Sims did, but nobody ever reads those things, as someone stated earlier. Remove it to a location such as the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where people go precisely to learn about African American history, where it can be put into context and what he did can be explained, or it can be destroyed. But I personally believe that history should never be destroyed. It should be put into context. So my recommendation, which I hope will be enacted, is that it be removed to a place where it can be put into context. And people can learn exactly what Marion J. Sims did.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Next is Gregory Razzano.
Thank you very much. People of the commission, hi. I imagine it's going to be a little bit weird addressing you in this way because our topic is a very intimate one. To me, the reason your commission has been formed and this process is taking place is because the city is doing some serious soul searching right now. Soul searching that I believe is taking place across the nation, born from the events at Charlottesville and is long overdue. Public art is at the heart of how the city expresses its soul. Statues and monuments play a unique role in this soul expression. Many statues feature human beings at superhuman proportions, elevated high up above the observers below, symbols of glorification and idolization. History is not somehow encased in these statues. At least in my conception, history is made up of the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, and the stories we tell our children. At the Queen's Forum alone, we heard several divergent histories of Christopher Columbus, among other people. We must not fail to analyze how these statues make people feel. If we are trying to promote inclusiveness and welcome to all, these ideas need public works that give people a feeling that goes beyond welcome, a feeling of belonging. I ask, do some of the city's statues and monuments undermine a feeling of belonging? We need to think about how we, in our own cultural and ethnic backgrounds, relate to these statues and monuments when trying to answer this question and when making decisions about them. For instance, recently I asked myself, how would Christopher Columbus have treated me, a fair-skinned man of European descent and Catholic upbringing? And how might that affect how I feel about the statue? And there are so many people in this city, black, white, or brown people, Native American or Latino people, Buddhist, Jewish, or Muslim people, just to name only a few. Who? How might Christopher Columbus have treated them? If the answer does harm to these people's sense of belonging in this city, and I believe that it may, then I cannot accept this glorification. I cannot accept a statue that relates to so many people in this way. Informational plaques are a mere parenthesis to the billboard that is a glorification of intolerance, or in the case of the J. Marion Sims statue, glorifying disregard for Black lives. How do we relate? How do we move forward?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tariq Shahid.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Let me first of all say that I'm grateful to be in a country that allows us to have this kind of dialogue with something that's created so much divide, great divide. My name is Tariq Shahid. I'm here representing Imam Pasha from Masjid Malcolm Shabazz, the mosque in Harlem, named after Malcolm X. I want to say this, that I'm speaking also from a people, the only people in America who are here, who came to America without a plan. Please think that. I know sometimes it looks like we volunteered, but we didn't. We're here without a plan. Everybody else who came here to America came with a plan. But I say this, please understand that unity, the diversity are the wheels or the legs that unity needs to proceed. You don't have, America's based on diversity. So on the one hand, yes, these some very horrific things have happened, and certainly we need to acknowledge them. On the other hand, there are people who have sensitivity for those issues differently than I share. So I'm more inclined for what the sister here said. Number one, why do we have libraries? Why do we have museums? A library is a place as a point of reference, not a dwelling place. We don't live in our memory. We use it as a point of reference for where we want to go in the future. So it seems to me that because we have such a great divide, to take something all the way out of the society would be inappropriate. Why? Because if you remove it altogether, it can happen again. Same mind can creep up that create the problem from the first place because it's nowhere to be acknowledged. So to me, it wouldn't be, I would think that what we'd want to do is in each borough that they have the statues, that we would find a place for them. And that place should serve as a point of reference, as a museum, to identify something in history, some that people will like, because everybody's not keyed in on the horrific things. Some people are keyed on some of the value that came about through these things. So I think that if we had a museum, and Imam Pasha, our Imam said, if we had a museum where those were there, and then I came along and I said, let's give it a name, and it would be Lest We Forget. Because Lest We Forget could serve both sides, the people who are angry and the people who will see the benefit. So let us be mindful that always in everything, let's seek the balance. Let's not respond to the extremes. Extreme on this side, extreme on this side. Let us find the balance. What is America about? The balance. We all live here, we're all from different culture, different food, and everything. However, we're not here to dislike each other. We're here to get to learn from each other, so we should do that. I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The next three are Aaron Minch, Betty Lyons, and Anthony Munchin. Okay. Do we want to start with Betty? And then, I'm sorry, you are? Aaron, and then Anthony. Okay. So we'll start down at this end with Betty, and then Aaron, and then Anthony. Thank you.
Warm greetings to everyone, Niwahaskanu. My original name is Gainha'a, and my colonized name is Betty Lyons, and I am a proud citizen of the Onondaga Nation and president of the American Indian Law Alliance. I want to begin by acknowledging the original peoples of these territories, the Lenape. My own people, the Haudenosaunee, also had influence on these territories, and as we still do today. I would like to thank the members of the New York City Mayoral Advisory Commission on City Art, Monuments, and Markers. And I want to acknowledge my Mohawk sister, Dr. Audra Simpson. The best kept secret in American history is the doctrine of discovery. And I would like to talk about how the monuments to Christopher Columbus and the celebration of Christopher Columbus keeps this secret hidden. The U.S. system of land title is rooted in centuries-old documents from the Vatican, the Catholic Church known as papal bulls. Collectively, they are known as the doctrine of discovery. The first papal bull and edict from Pope Nicholas of the doctrine is titled Terra Nullius, meaning void, uninhabited, and states that any land which in Christians do not live is declared empty and open to conquest. These papal bulls gave Europeans the jurisdiction to invade, conquer, fight, and subjugate indigenous peoples around the world. While these documents were written centuries ago, the U.S. Supreme Court has cited the doctrine of discovery to deny land rights to the United Nations as recently as 2005. This is not in just our history. It's still happening today. Claims that Columbus discovered America are untrue, as millions of indigenous people flourished here, my ancestors. So to say that is false. Continuing to celebrate Columbus and leaving the monuments of him up is a continued act of erasure to ensure that Americans will never be educated on the reality of our harsh shared history. The papal bulls set forth a mindset and perception that indigenous peoples such as myself were not human beings, therefore not equal to all others. The statues depicting the Columbus ignores his enslavement and massacre of indigenous peoples and the promotion of sex slavery of children as young as 9 years old. These are not merely a difference of opinion. These are historical facts, and they are taken directly from Columbus's own diary entries and journals. This is not someone worthy of a monument or a celebration. Columbus began the imposition of the doctrine which supposedly granted European settlers sovereignty over non-Christian lands discovered by their explorers. That continues to provide the legal underpinning of the denial of land rights to our indigenous peoples and nations. It is easier to ignore the truth. It is easier for Americans to continue the belief that Americans known to us as Turtle Island was uninhabited than to face the realities of genocide, attacks on the environment, the stealing of our lands, and the enslavement of our peoples. We are not asking for reconciliation, as it's not possible to reconcile all that has been done to us. But you can make a conscientious choice today to do the right thing, as these unspeakable horrors and many more are not deserving.
Wrap it up. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Our suggestion is that you put this statue in a museum for our children and the 7 generations yet unborn to learn the true history of this country.
Okay, thank you very much. Aaron Lynch is next.
Hello, my name is Aaron Minch, and I'm
Can
kind
you
of glad
speak directly into the mic, please? Thank you.
I'm kind of glad it went this direction, because that's the first question is this: who discovered America? And they say, well, is it Christopher Columbus? Well, 500 years before that, the Vikings landed. You know what happened to them? Native Americans killed them, so they couldn't be credited with the discovery of America. Well, they say, well, it wasn't the Vikings that did it. People natives were already here. Well, didn't they wander from Asia across the isthmus between Russia and Alaska? So they came here, they migrated here just like the white man did. And similarly, did they learn violence from the white man, or did they kill each other before Columbus landed? And I'd argue they did. If you look at the Aztecs in Mexico, you say the Spanish were these terrible people. Before they got here, the Aztecs took lesser tribes and used them as human sacrifices, cutting their hearts out on a pyramid. So to give this impression that these people were incapable of violence before we got here is just ludicrous. And what else did Columbus do? He gave us a path to Christians to escape persecution in Europe. Under Muslims in Spain, Muslims marched up into Europe and conquered the entire country of Spain. It took them 760 years to get that back for Catholics to be free again. And in that same year, Columbus was granted the grant he needed to come here. So he gave us a pathway away from persecution from Muslims, from Jews in Israel. Christians had to run from them or be killed like St. Stephen was. So what do? We go to Rome. Who's there? Atheists, people that say you must worship Caesar. And we said, no, we only worship the Lord Jesus Christ, and we're not going to worship Caesar. Well, we're going to kill you then. Or you have to hide in these catacombs and wait until you have somebody converted like Constantine to the Catholic faith that he's credited with discovering. So for me, that's the whole argument, is we didn't create violence. Christians didn't create them. White men didn't create them. Native Americans killed each other before they got here. And I'd argue white people learned violence from people that invaded their lands. Muslims in Spain, Muslims in Eastern Europe. When Christianity was just Jews who converted from Judaism, they were killed too by Jews, by Romans. St. Paul was killed by Romans. So I believe in Columbus. I thank him for giving me a pathway from persecution in Europe by anti-Christian bigots. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony Munchen. Yes, you can.
Okay. You notice that he didn't mention anything about black Americans, right? But anyway, that's his history. What I'm talking about is this. We got a lot of wonderful people here making all kinds of suggestions about things that happened many, many years ago. We're arguing about statues. If we got problems with the statues, just like we got a newspaper, you all sent the newspaper saying what each statue did bad and what they did wrong. Now, the majority of the people in here are all hypocrites because all their grandfathers and grandmothers and everybody else were all racist, and you know it. There were black racists just as many as white racists. But since we were brought over here many, many years ago, I'm a black American, not an African American, okay? Them are just my ancestors. The point is this. The statues should stay where they are. It ain't gonna change none of your racist hang-ups or any other problems. All you need to do is just put a diagram right on each statue that you felt that this person did that, or this general did that. We got a school up here called Truman High School. Harry S. Truman ordered 2 A-bombs on the Japanese people, and we got statues of him. You understand, the problem is not just the statues. The problem is that we in a modern time, and we are coming up with this nonsense about being so concerned about all the racial hang-ups. We all know that. We know Columbus came here and maybe killed so-and-so. He didn't do it himself. He had an entourage. If people want to realize that in the year that Columbus discovered that there were Indians here, there were, in North America, all the way to South America, there were over 5 million Indians, Native Americans. In 1900 now, there was only 45,000 Indians left. through whatever they had to go through whatever our race had to go through. The point is that leave the statues where they are. You can have any kind of hang-ups, but sometimes all these people that are sitting in here need to look in the mirror, okay? Just look in the mirror and realize what your parents did to other people at the time y'all did it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next three is Sylvia Santiello, George Mudge, and Bill Quinn. Okay, and you're George, and then Sylvia, and then Bill. Okay, go ahead. Can you, I think you have to turn it around and, yeah, lean it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thanks. Okay, and speak right into the mic, please.
Good morning. Written copies of this testimony.
You have, please, can speak right into the mic. It's hard, it's terrible acoustics. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much.
Good morning. The written copies of this testimony have been provided for all members of the Commission and the 4 ex officio city agencies. The written testimony contains photographs. I have written, photographed, and published 2 books on the statues in Central Park. My testimony is limited to these monuments. The opinions in this testimony are my own and do not reflect the views of any organization or other person. 2 general comments. Each statue is a combination of fact and fantasy. The fact of bronze or stones in a certain shape and color, and the fantasy of the sculptor and of each individual viewer. Each sculptor has exercised artistic license to be both creative and selective in the portrayal of the subject. Each viewer has artistic license to assess and interpret a statue, but not to vandalize it, either physically or by unfair criticism. To the extent any statue tells a story, that story is not complete, and each statue asks the viewer to step back into history of the park, New York City, the United States, art, music, and the world, and to understand and assess the statue as art in the broader historical context. Part of the task of the Commission is to identify any symbols of hate or offensive monuments and make recommendations. The term symbol of hate almost defies definition. I want to move on to comments on the Sims statue. And I want to briefly describe what I think are 5 options. Maintain the statue as is, unlikely to be a good solution. Add a plaque near the statue in its current location, unlikely to be a good solution. Remove the statue to storage, this would be unfortunate. Move the statue to a hospital or medical center, possibly this should be considered. But here's a viable option. Move the statue to a site inside Central Park and create a woman health monument which would have 2 elements, the current statue and statues honoring the 3 slaves. The current statue is appropriate to honor Dr. Sims, but additional statues are appropriate to honor his slave patients.
Okay, thank you very much.
My time.
Thank you. And thank everybody for being very close to being on time. Sylvia Santiello. Please speak directly into the mic.
Yes, it's Sylvia Spaniolo. And I'm here to represent the Schiller Institute in our international format because the defense of Christopher Columbus and the ideas of discovery generally are international. And I wanted to refer to a letter that was written by an Italian leader in Italy to the President of the United States, September 21st. I'm just going to read excerpts of it, and then I can submit this to the board. She says, as an Italian citizen and chairwoman, I call on you to intervene in the defense of Christopher Columbus. The same people who are out to destroy the U.S. presidency, led by Wall Street speculator George Soros, who destroyed the Italian lira in 1992, are also trying to eradicate history and culture, not only in the United States, but internationally. Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, his Italian collaborator Toscanelli, Columbus, Vespucci, and others were part of a revolution in culture, art, geography, and science which made the discovery of America possible. The deliberate explosion in human creativity that was the Italian Renaissance is a truly proud moment in all human history, and not merely for Italians. The people who want to abolish Columbus Day, whether they are maliciously witting or merely deluded, are out to also dismantle this Western cultural and scientific heritage. It has always been the British, including the cultural thought police, associated with the British Museum, who have tried to downplay and dismantle the Italian Renaissance, to undermine its successful expedition to explore new lands and to obfuscate and deny its mission to construct, quote, in a new world, a new and better sovereign nation state, superior to those of Europe. The United States of America eventually became that nation state. This was a central, conscious part of the grand project of discovery of Cusa, Toscanelli, and Columbus. There was nothing mistaken in that intention. Today, the Schiller Institute is advocating around the world for the United States to join with the new Silk Road of China, to bring new discoveries, new creativity, to eradicate poverty, to increase the population density. Yes, increase the population density, because that's how you're going to get new discoveries. You cannot have human discovery with a population that is being reduced. And that is the policy right now of a lot of these things like the taking down of statues, the taking down of history. You have a policy to eliminate human creativity, which is the essence of the economy, a real economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Quinn is next.
Hello, I'm Bill Quinn, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and share my thoughts on the name of one of our beloved landmarks and parks, and that would be Fort Tryon Park in Upper Manhattan, named in honor of the former colonial governor of North Carolina and eventually New York, William Tryon. Probably his name hasn't come up too often in this discussion, primarily because the person I'm commenting on is more of a footnote to our American history rather than a titan of democracy or discovery. But in his way, the name's parksake, William Tryon was extremely influential in the road to American independence, as much as the English acts of lack of representation that forced the hand of revolution against tyranny. William Tryon was governor of North Carolina, and we might say he got his big break when he became governor of New York in the 1770s. So as part of his job, he was responsible for enforcing many of the taxes in the colonies in his charge. The best known, the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, and everyone's favorite, the Tea Act. He did his job. He collected taxes on a not so grateful colonists on behalf of their king and the empire. If it ended there, that would be fine. I'd say keep his name in the park. However, after the war started, Governor Tryon became Lieutenant Tryon in the British Army. And in July 1779, he was tasked with cutting off New England and supplies crucial to New York and the South by taking the Connecticut corridor and blockading Long Island Sound. Under his command, the British sailed across Long Island Sound and landed on the Norwalk, Westport, Fairfield, and New Haven shoreline and proceeded to do battle. Again, a man doing his duty. However, in fighting and defeating basically a ragtag militia, General Tryon called for the burning of all the homes, churches, shops, farms, boats, and crops through the area and felt it necessary to brutalize the citizens by giving his troop the authority to rape the women and young girls. This was also done on his swath up to Danbury, Connecticut. Apparently, Tryon's own officers and many soldiers were appalled by his actions, and he was all but censored for his cruelty and complete lack of honor. By today's standards, Lieutenant General Tryon would be tried as a war criminal. We don't honor Rommel or Stalin or Osama bin Laden with a park designation, nor should we honor William Tryon. He should be relegated to the trash heap of history. I would like to suggest, given the beautiful spot that this park occupies and the great people who have made New York safe for its many citizens, I would like to suggest renaming the park to first responders in recognition of the courage and true bravery of our firefighters, EMS, Coast Guard, police, and Red Cross, and so many others who volunteer and sacrifice on our behalf. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next three are Andrew Sidor, Joanne Rubino, and Raymond Cabral. You are? Andrew, okay, and then Joanne, and then Raymond. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, I'm Andrew Sidor, and I have been a licensed New York City tour guide for over 19 years, which means I've seen some statues come and I've seen some statues go in that time. Actually, when I'm giving walking tours Lower Manhattan, I have often told the story of the 9th of July, 1776, when New Yorkers, having just heard a hot new document from Philadelphia called the Declaration of Independence, ran from what's now City Hall Park, the full length of New York City then, down to Bowling Green to tear down a statue of King George III, and you can actually see pieces of that statue that got saved and hidden at the Museum of City, New York. But I want to talk not about statues today, but about something else that's in Lower Manhattan, which is a series of plaques that mark each and every ticker tape parade we ever had along what's called the Canyon of the Hero, where we hold these parades. Have held them since first parade 1886 for the celebrate the Statue of Liberty opening up. I'm concerned about comments made by our mayor. First thing we're going to do is tear out the plaque of Marshal Pétain, who was the head of Vichy France during World War II. I've actually often pointed out that plaque on walking tours as a teachable moment, because the parade was in 1931, when he was being honored as a hero of World War I. He was not yet a villain of World War II. That was not possible in 1931. Now, the context of these plaques, they were not there at all till 2004. This is in the wake of 9/11, when Lower Manhattan is recovering from that attack. Some of these plaques are 1 block away from the World Trade Center site. And, we knew we had the parades there, but no one knew what the parades were. There was, in fact, no list you could find that was actually comprehensive. We constructed that list in the making of these plaques. We actually reminded ourselves about parades we had forgotten. Now, if you look at that full list, there's a lot of questionable parades. We used to give a parade for every world leader that came here. Some of those world leaders are controversial. We gave a parade for an outgoing mayor. He was outgoing because he was almost jailed for corruption, and we had to send William O'Dwyer off to be ambassador of Mexico, but we gave him a parade before he went. These are very questionable. To remove any of those plaques, there's been debate about, are we changing history? That is literally a change of history, because that is an historical record. It's not an honor. I mean, to put plaques in a sidewalk where the subject of footsteps, gum, urination, whatever, is not an honor. But to remove any of those plaques is a distortion of history. So I would really caution that not happen. Although in my research, I did find one plaque I think is an error. There's one dated May 22nd, 1963. They say it was for an astronaut, Gordon Cooper. I'm pretty sure they were celebrating the fact I was born that day, so we might correct that. Other than that, got to keep all the plaques good, bad, and ugly.
Thank you. Joanne Rubino.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak and express my thoughts. I'm a Bronx resident, lifelong, and a member of Community Board 11, although I'm here as a private citizen in that regard. But I am a member of FIAME, which is the Forum of Italian American Educators based in the Bronx. We are also one of the scores of Italian American organizations which have joined the Save Columbus Coalition, and we're one of the signatories of the letter that was sent to all New York City leaders protesting and politicians and people who were running for office, protesting the possible dismantling, defacing, or placing a so-called explanatory plaque at the base of the Columbus statue at Columbus Circle. Right before the turn of the century, in the aftermath of the mass migration from Italy to America, Italians were the subject of widespread bigotry and violence. In 1891, for instance, Italians in New Orleans were lynched. That year, in response to this, the Italian-American newspaper Il Progresso began a campaign to raise funds to erect a statue of Columbus as a gift to New York City, as a symbol of Italian-Americans' love for their new country and to show that they were good citizens. Immigrants and small businesses donated to the cause, and the money was finally raised. The statue, a work of art commissioned by Italian sculptor Gaetano Russo, was erected with much fanfare 1 year after the lynchings. In 1892, to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's landing, the statue was less an homage to, the statue was less an homage to a single man than a symbol of pride and a focus for Italian-American immigrants to celebrate their heritage as well as to show their patriotic feelings for the United States of America. This commission has served to alienate many Italian Americans. Many feel it is an attempt to discredit Italian Americans by revising history to suit modern-day political agendas. If the statues are compromised in any way, it will be seen by Italian Americans and other groups as an effort to rewrite history, our history. People are not perfect, and Columbus was not perfect, but he is the greatest symbol of Italian-American pride and not something that should be played with for political reasons. In addition, I have almost 900 signatures for a petition that I'd like to present from Senators Klein, Savino, and Assemblymember Jonai. I don't know who I can give these to.
Yeah, so if you could give that to Nadia here,
okay,
then
thank
she'll
you.
accept it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Raymond Cabral.
Yes, I grew up in Haiti, and
you got to speak right into the mic.
Yeah. I grew up in Haiti, formerly known as Hispaniola, island of Hispaniola. As you may be well aware of, this is where Christopher Columbus landed, and the atrocities that were visited upon the indigenous population in this island is, to me, is comparable to anything that we've seen during the Holocaust that we commemorate here in the US. And now, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed if you went back to Haiti right now or anywhere in the Caribbean to find direct descendants of the indigenous population as a result of these atrocities that Columbus and his followers visited upon these folks. Well, 3 points I want to go on to make. Well, first of all, just imagine if we didn't have to deal with any of these statues, none of these statues were up, right? Then we would allow folks to come in and make a strong case for having to put up a monument to celebrate what? I mean, what ideals that these monuments of work of arts would be celebrating? And that should be incumbent upon them. And at the same time, this vacancy, this absence, would permit a forum where we can have an active debate about what it is that we want to celebrate in a public space. Secondly, I mean, this is not about censoring artistic expression in any way. This is about resisting propaganda. This is about resisting a form of art that celebrates patriarchy, violence, and subjugation. This is what this resistance movement to me is about. And thirdly, and if we're debating different version of history here, so often we understand how history is told from the perspective of the oppressors. Now, this is definitely an opportunity for the rest of us to have a people's history, to have the oppressed, to have folks that have truly sacrificed to make this American dream possible for the rest of us. And that's the opportunity that we're presented with now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of our commissioners, Amy Freitag, has to depart at this moment. Not yet. So we have one more. Do you have more? Okay, two more? Several more. Okay. The next three is Shannon Dingle, Mona Richardson, and Linda Fakes. Okay, if you could, I'm sorry, you are?
Shannon Dingle.
Shannon is first, and then you are?
Linda Fakes.
Linda, and then Mona. Okay. Shannon Dingle, please.
Good morning.
Proceed. Thank you.
I've been a resident of the Bronx for the last 17 years and was born in the old Morrisania Hospital down the road. Thank you for this opportunity to share my opinion. I think the problem we currently face as a society regarding these monuments is that we are confusing two different issues. It is appropriate and long overdue that statues of Confederate veterans of the Civil War be removed, as well as streets named in their so-called honor be renamed. I can't recall any other war wherein the losers were so lauded. Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Nathan Bedford Forrest, etc. were all traitors to this country. Davis, Lee, Forrest, and the rest of the top conspirators should have been hung. Isn't that what we do with traitors? Isn't that what happened to the Rosenbergs? No, we should not enshrine or seek to honor men and women who sought to tear our great nation apart. What we should be doing with them, which we are not, is teaching the real story of the events that led to the Civil War in our schools, so our students understand that Africans in bondage were not workers, as some of our more recent textbooks have tried to claim. And had the rebels been vanquished, as they should have been, we would have made much more better and faster progress on so-called race relations. Now, what about Columbus? This is where it gets sticky. Current scholarship indicates that he carried out genocide against the indigenous Arawak and Taino peoples of the Caribbean. If we take down Columbus, where does it end? Do we rename Columbus Circle, Washington, D.C., Columbus, Ohio? This becomes a slippery slope. I may not advocate for his removal, but you won't catch me at a Columbus Day parade. What about the statue of Dr. J. Marion Sims that sits on Fifth Avenue across from the New York Academy of Medicine? Dr. Sims is considered to be the father of modern gynecology. And how did he learn so much about the female reproductive system? By operating without anesthesia or consent on enslaved African women. Many feel we should remove his statue. But when we do that, we are not telling the full story. And not telling the full story is what has brought us to this moment, to alternative facts. Let's keep Dr. Marion, and let's erect a statue of enslaved women next to his statue, so we can know the full story of how he tortured defenseless women for scientific advancement and his own prestige. Or how about a statue of Henrietta Lacks across the street from the New York Academy of Medicine? Without her cancer cells, which were used for research without her consent, we would not have had most of the major medical breakthroughs of the latter half of the 20th century, including the polio vaccine, many chemotherapy drugs, the HPV vaccine, and in vitro fertilization. The statues we erect are to enshrine and honor the best of us. Unfortunately, many of our quote-unquote heroes did terrible things, and they are a part of our history, but only one part. What we need to do is tell the full stories, and there are so many that have been forgotten or purposely suppressed. By not telling the entire story, some of us are left feeling less than or not as important, or that we don't belong. And those who may be supported by the current version of history have a hard time believing that people who don't look like them helped build this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, no applause. Thank you. Linda Fakes.
Good morning. My name is Linda Fakes.
Can you speak directly into the mic?
I am a Bronx resident forever. I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I still reside in the Bronx. I'm not going to repeat the many history lessons that have been said. I think we heard many of them. We don't need to hear another one. What I do want to say is that the history of New York City, when we walk with our children and they point to a statue and they say, "Who is that?" You start a conversation of history by removing all of the culture that we have in our beautiful city. What are we doing to the minds of our young children? I worked in education for 31 years. I recently retired. I feel it's a disservice to the people of New York to remove parts of our history. Some is ugly, some is disgusting, but it's us. It's who made us Americans, and it's who made us New Yorkers. We have no right to remove part of our history. Next, you'll take it out of our history books. It's what we did. Humans are not nice to humans at times, but you don't erase it. You leave it and you learn from it. As the philosopher George Santa Anna said, "If those who cannot remember history, the past are condemned to repeat it." We do not want to repeat the ugliness, so let's not take it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Mona Richardson.
Good morning.
Please speak directly into the mic. Thank you very much.
Good morning. On the day of my grandmother's funeral, I found out about an incident that affected her, her parents, and siblings in Georgia. My great-grandfather went to withdraw funds from his bank account. He was told to leave his bank book and return. He returned the following day. His account had a zero balance and he was threatened. The entire family left Georgia that day and moved to West Virginia. This was sometime after 1920. My great-grandfather was forced to abandon over 125 acres of land in Georgia that he owned. He was in his 70s. Imagine having to start all over at that age. I feel that in New York City, all statues that have any kind of affiliation to the Confederacy has to be removed from public property. The Confederacy lost, though when you visit certain areas and see Confederate flags and symbols everywhere, you would not know it. The other statues should be allowed to stay, but each with the caveat, posting another side of what the person did. This includes the statues of Marion Sims and Christopher Columbus. History cannot be removed by removing a statue. Off topic, but I hope this will eventually extend to what is taught in New York City schools. Did you know the ground the Empire State Building is on was owned by a black woman? Some land that NYU is on was owned by a black man. The first permanent resident of New York City was a man of color from the Dominican Republic. Broadway, before it was called Broadway, was used by Native Americans as a road. Look at the styles of many metal fences and grills around New York City. Historically, they were made by West Africans based on their cultural symbols, which is still being copied today. And don't forget, Native Americans were also enslaved in the US. What about the other people of different ethnicities who contributed to New York City throughout its history? Everyone that lived in New York contributed to it. I hope that this commission will not do a whitewash like the National Park Service did, read the Statue of Liberty and the original reason behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have two more panels. The next one is Howard Giske, Egidio Samantilli, and Sharon Hightower. Okay, Mabel, thank you very much. And sir, you are on the left? You're Howard, and then
I'm Samatelli, Gidio Samatelli.
Gidio, okay. You'll be the, okay, and Sharon, would you take a seat? Sharon Hightower, yes, you're in the middle there, if you would. Okay. Yes, Howard, go ahead.
Okay.
Would you like to stand? You can, yeah, take the mic.
Yeah, I think I'll stand, feel a little bit better. But anyway, yeah, I'm Howard. I live in the Bronx, and I was shocked to hear these reports about taking down of the Columbus statue and the Columbus Circle, which we know about and dearly love. And also, from the standpoint of Hispanics, I'm married to a Hispanic. I have a child with a Hispanic. Many Hispanics also claim Indian heritage, but the studies show that the potential relative population density before Columbus of the Americas was below 10 million, and that now you have 70 million Indians, indigenous, living in countries such as the US, Mexico, Peru, Guatemala, and that we share Indian heritage with foods such as tamales, with corn, with the brightly colored dress, and so forth. So I think a lot of this attacks on Columbus came from the unjust hysteria against our President Trump, who is sort of a Marco Polo-like president, bringing $300 billion in trade from China in his recent visits. And that as a parent, Columbus is the ultimate explorer, the permanent connector of Europe with the Americas, and hopefully the moon, the Mars, and the galaxy. And that Columbus helped establish a new race with the combination of Europeans, Indians, and also black people in the Americas. So we embrace Columbus, who has brought us to where we are today, and who is, in a sense, a father of this country. Like we say, Columbus, Columbia, the gem of the ocean. And that we will continue this campaign for our mixed culture, our mixed heritage, both white, black, and Hispanic, and the development of science and the development of our culture in the great tradition of Columbus and other explorers such as Magellan, Vasco da Gama, and later Lewis and Clark. And that, as the poet said in the Ode to Joy, be embraced, ye millions yonder, take this kiss throughout the world, brothers o'er the stars unfurled, must reside a loving father. So we do continue to defend the statue of Columbus, and we wish that nobody touches it. And we realize there are many other statues that could be discussed, but I wanted to only talk about Columbus today, which is very dear to me.
Thank you. Sharon Hightower.
Good morning. Basically, I just want to say that whether the statue stays or the statue is put in a museum, the main thing is that it is there where people know where Columbus Circle is. People come from various places and they know it as a landmark. The reality is the history is what it is. And it's time for America, period, not just New York, to own up to the truth of its history and stop staying behind a smoke screen. They can put some plaque next to the statue, like I said, whether it stays or whether it goes in a museum, but put a plaque there that at least tells the truth of a man who just wound up coming to some lands that some other people was already on, as simple as that. So, I mean, how do you claim land in the first place, land that's here for all of mankind to live on? How do you come in and do that and mar the history of people who are already there and stunt their growth? And as a person that is Native American, an indigenous person of color of the Western Hemisphere, says I really don't have any respect for America like I used to. And I'm not African. Okay, I respect my history from there, but I'm a black person and I'm a Native American person. But he thought he was in India. He was confused. And I'm sorry that the Italian people don't have anything better to aspire to or have any kind of pride in, except this man who came over there and on the heels of that started everything to do with the annihilation of the American Indian people, 500 nations, okay, as well as slavery of black people. And you can look at these walls right here in this rotunda, and you can see that representation in these very walls here in this building that we are in right now. So why not just tell the truth as it is of what happened? Leave that information there for people to see the truth. It's an ugly truth, that this was basically a privateer, which is also known as a pirate. And that's what they do. They go across the waters, taking over other people's properties, taking their lives, taking their land, and that's why to this day, we are paying rent, okay? We're paying rent and mortgages and all this stuff way out of proportion, price gouging. We're in the era of the needy and the greedy. Okay, New York is ridiculous with all that, and a lot of that has to do with that same history of lands that people should have been living on and enjoying one another instead of stunting one group's progress and another group's progress. If they had came and acted right, I could see it. But it's not what it is. They need to tell the truth of the matter, regardless whether the statue stays or goes. And the same thing goes for the Statue of Liberty, the whore in the harbor. Because you have people coming over, you talk about immigrants that's trying to do better. That didn't happen for those African people, those black people, or those people who were already living here, those red-blooded people of the Native American. And I thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you. Mr. Sementilli.
Thank you. Before we commence, could I know what the panel, the identification of the panel? There's no name tags. Who are you, sir?
The panel identified itself at the beginning. Please give your testimony.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry I missed it. Are you Mr. Walker? No.
I'm Mr. Finkelpearl. Go ahead.
Finkelpearl. Okay. Thank you. Giulio Sementilli, Chairman, Bronx Italian American Cultural Association. Italian immigrant, never owned slaves, never raped, pillaged, or any of the above. I'm here today to ask for the resignation of this panel. This political panel, for the exception of Mr. John Covelli, who I know personally, is a political panel that should be dissolved. I ask for everyone here to resign. I cannot believe that this panel can meet the criteria of the mayor. Accurate, contextual, historical lens. Historical lens. Well, now we're going to use a prism. Fine. And Mr. Walker's statement of assessing symbolism and significance. How could we achieve that when the panel has been stacked against us? I don't believe public art should be funded by government. I agree with everything here being said. I believe we should remove everything, from presidents to all the statues, and have them privately funded. It's like religion. We have a separation, we should be separating the arts. Should not be funded with government grants. I know my history. I don't need a statue. My Roman blood that runs through me. At one time we've had African Roman senates. We've had Roman black African popes. We could go back thousands of years, not 500 years. But this panel is political. Mayor de Blasio wants to hit a nerve, a national nerve here, for his political gain. That's the problem. Disgraceful that this mayor, 4 days after an incident in the South, he has created this panel. 4 days later, reactionary, justifying himself. Well, we could understand that. We could relate to it by the fact that Mr. de Blasio's mother is a published author, publishing a book on Italian partisans. We understand that. We want to justify actions, but not on our backs. The Italian American community have done nothing. We face more discrimination here. We had been part of the largest lynching in this country. They hanged Italian Americans in this country. And de Blasio wants to hang Italian Americans today. In a metaphoric sense, de Blasio should be ashamed of himself, and I ask this board to, and this panel, to dissolve it. Resign and dissolve this board. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next three will be David Gelman, Casimiro Cibelli, and Sergio Villaride. Sir, on the left, you are? Your name?
David.
Dear David, okay, and then?
David Gelman.
Okay.
Good morning, commissioners. Having grown up in the New York City suburbs and attending public schools, scoring quite high on the Regents Social Studies exam, and earning bachelor's and master's degrees, I always considered myself a reasonably well-educated person. I learned that yes, the Civil War was about slavery. Yes, it was about interstate economics. Yes, it was about states' rights. And yes, it was somewhat about heritage. Then almost 2 years ago, I learned about the Cornerstone Address on a late-night talk show. For those of you who are not familiar with it, as I was not, the Cornerstone Address was a speech given in 1861 by Alexander Stephens, Jefferson Davis's Vice President of the Confederacy. Here are his words, not mine. Quote, "Our new government is founded upon exactly this idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests with the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world and based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." End quote. After hearing this, like the German people who have much to be proud of, the Nazi movement and the swastika not among them, I note that our Southern brethren have much to be proud of, but the Confederacy and its symbols are not among them. That includes the Confederate battle flag and the many Civil War statues. However, having said that, while they do not deserve venerated positions in our parks and plazas, nor should they be destroyed, but rather relocated, in context, in our museums. The flags and denoted individuals should be recognized for their roles in attempting to denigrate a whole race of our people and to tear our nation asunder. This principle should also extend to our esteemed Hall of Fame for Great Americans, the original Hall of Fame, just a mile up the road at Bronx Community College. The busts of General Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee should remain, but with appropriate plaques documenting their roles in a dark yet significant part of American history. I look forward to your similar assessment of the many other statues, sites, and street names in our great city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cibelli.
Thank you. Never in my lifetime would I imagine that I'd be sitting here advocating to preserve the statue of Christopher Columbus, or any statue that's relevant to our history. But this is what we've become. And not to be emotive about this, but we know what the motives are. It started with a District 8 representative, the Speaker of the Council, called Melissa Mark Verito, who, for political expedience, decided to inject this discourse into the great city of New York, a city that is diverse, that is known throughout the world for its diversity, that has opened up its doors to immigrants of all statures, of all nations, and has learned from the early 1800s, from the dawn of the Civil War, how to get along. Because back in those days, it was brutal. But we've come very, very far. And to believe that one person who is elected in a district that is impoverished, with failing schools, and with a real need for affordable housing that is yet to be addressed, although she would say it is, that she has injected this discussion about taking down our history to the point where she put the mayors back to the wall. This is unheard of. This happened at the end of World War II, when they dropped the Iron Curtain, and nations, cities like Prague and other cities throughout the European continent were cut off from Western society, and they lived in a communist system that destroyed their culture. This is the beginning. This is how it starts. But I have faith in our democracy. I have faith. It's called term limits. And I'm very glad to know that Melissa Mark Verito is going to be out of a job and no longer a legislature here in the city council. So she won't have a platform to put forth these sorts of discussions. I feel for the mayor because I believe the mayor is an honorable man. While I don't agree with him on many issues, I think he's a little too left for my taking and my liking. He was put up against the wall. And this distinguished panel, I have faith in because I know you're all reasonable people. Your backgrounds are admirable, and you're going to do what's right. But taking down a statue that was put up by people once ago, a long time ago, for whatever reason, right or wrong, cannot be looked at by the lens of political expedience now in the 21st century. And the esteemed chairman pointed out to us that this is happening throughout the country. It's a trend. It's a funded trend. I would go as far as to say, with all due respect to the great Dr. King, should we take down Dr. King's statue today because he was anti-gay back in the time? Of course not. So ladies and gentlemen, please put reason to work and let this all go away.
Thank you. Next is Sergio Villarite.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the commissioners for being here. I am a Bronx resident. I am also a retired New York City employee and a military person, a reserve officer for 31 years. And these things are very meaningful to me. And I've given a lot of thought to it. I think there's certainly a distinction in the Confederate monuments, in people who betrayed their oaths, who took upon, as my distinguished colleague on the community board, David Gelman, said, took on a cause of racial superiority, of subjugation of other people. And we should preserve them in some way without highlighting them, without making them something to be celebrated. I often think, and I don't live in Riverdale, but I have many friends there, if we already have something, a Herman Goring statue up there, would that last? But for other people, there are groups, there are people who are just as offensive, who fought for the subjugation, we do have statues of, and that's a serious concern, that history does need to be preserved in some way. And those statues particularly should be put in a museum and have something appropriate done with them so that we can learn from it. I will sit here and tell you I'm opposed to the taking down of statues that we view people from a lens of the 21st century. The Columbus statue. There are certainly issues in our history that we have to deal with, but I fear that we do the opposite by hiding these things. I believe that appropriate use of technology to have not just a plaque, but to have some sort of streaming Bluetooth history lesson when someone walks in front of these things, to give background on what the Civil War was, to discuss the cornerstone that Mr. Gelman just discussed and the philosophies behind it would be something that's appropriate, to discuss what happened to the Native Americans upon Columbus's arrival. I feel it's very, very important that we do learn from this, and we say, this is painful. This is a painful part of who we are. You look around this room, the only person of color on that wall is the young man holding the horse. And that's not by accident. But when this room was built, when this room was made, that's the depiction of history, and that's who we were. And the fact that in 1922, somebody said, you know what, this is what we're putting up, is also who we are as Bronxites, as people of New York City, and that also needs to be maintained and learned from. It's a painful history. It's easy to say we never did that, we're all good, but to quote Tea House of the August Moon, pain makes man think, thought makes man wise, and wisdom makes life endurable. I hope that we grow wiser from these things and we're able to learn from them. Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you. The next panel is Janelle Drone, Vajara Kilgore, and Ed Waters. If you could give that to Nadia, who's right over there. Thank you very much. Is Ed Waters. And you, I'm sorry, your name is? Janelle. You're Janelle, and you are? Roger. Okay. So Ed Waters is here? Yes? Okay, thank you. Okay, Janelle. The timer's right there. Yes. Thank you.
Good morning, or is it afternoon?
Speak right into the mic.
Good morning, or is it afternoon? I'm a career educator, and I'm delighted to be a part of the process. Process is very important, and it is a staple of our democracy. I'm here not to argue for or against the statutes or the acts of annihilation or the atrocities that has been committed. But what I am concerned about is the cost that it would take. So I would to remove or to continue. I'm interested in an infrastructural analysis of the finances that will be incurred on the citizens. I would like the infrastructural analysis because I believe that it will promote transformative justice and provide us with a tremendous opportunity to promote truth and consequences. There are several examples that we can use as to how to move beyond this point of confusion, crisis, and hurt and pain that has been inflicted on many people. If we look at South Africa and what happened after Nelson Mandela came through, there was acts of annihilation committed, but there was a commission called the Truth and Consequences, which was able to move them past the hurt and pain and began to create a new discourse. I would like to make sure that each of the events, the conditions, and circumstances around all of these statues and medicine and science be incorporated written into the New York State curriculum throughout the academy, and make sure that every student who is aspiring to be a school leader or district leader or to get through the Regents exam have some knowledge where they will have to demonstrate their understanding of what this process is all about. And they will be able to defend the atrocities, the crimes, or the contributions that each of these documents, these statues, all of the hurt and the pain that many have endured. I come as a product of Cherokee and of African descent. I am completely embellished in the academy, and to provide this opportunity with schools is what I would like to see.
Thank you. That's Vajra Kilgore.
Right. Good morning. I'm going to address 3 of these statues. I've said before, I think J. Marion Sims is a slam dunk. Nobody has a kind word to say about him. He is deeply offensive to, I would say, every person of color, every woman, and even to the entire Jewish community of New York City, in as much as it seems to say that Yosef Mengele may have gone too far, but we can't say he didn't have the right idea. And the prospect of putting up additional statues to the women that he mutilated seems to play into a kind of fantasy that black people are here to sacrifice and serve, and that is not true. That statue needs to go. The one by the Museum of Natural History of Teddy Roosevelt, as we now know, was actually erected as a monument to white supremacy, to the subjugation of people who aren't white, and to eugenics. That has to go. I don't have a beef so much with Teddy Roosevelt as with what that statue was meant to say, in the same way as many of the statues of Confederate heroes were put up around the turn of the last century in order to say, guess what? We did win the Civil War. Finally, with Christopher Columbus, historically, it's not only that there were already people here when he got here, who had been here for millennia. There's good evidence for We know that there's previous European presence here, and there's good evidence for an African presence in the Americas. Millennia before Christopher Columbus arrived here, shortly before he arrived here in the 14th century when the Mali Empire sent people out. The Mali Empire was actually bigger than the Holy Roman Empire. Those people were here, and in Columbus's very own journal, he noted that Native Americans had confirmed that black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats, trading in gold-tipped spears. So we can forget the discovery. I think that, frankly, Christopher Columbus is not worthy of everything that many very proud Italian Americans have poured into him. I don't know that some of the hardworking people who put their nickels and dimes together to raise those statues would have done it if they had known what he did. There is a substantive difference between the bigotry of some people we might have admired or our own bigotry and chopping people's hands off and leaving them to bleed to death and slaving people. There are substantive differences there. I think it will be a long time before people are ready to give up the fantasy of Columbus, but it has a lot to do with if you're not actively engaged in dismantling the patriarchal hierarchy of abuse, you're just trying to get a better position within it. And that was a big piece of saying, no, 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 we don't belong in the victim category, we belong in the oppressed category. And we've seen this with white women when the 15th Amendment was passed, and we've seen it with white women when Barack Obama got the nomination for the presidency. This jockeying for position within a system of oppression and victimization, we cannot continue to enshrine anything that sets that up as a thing to be preserved.
Thank you very much. Okay, and the next, and I believe last panel is Deborah Myers. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Absolutely, Ed Waters. I did not mean to overlook you.
Good morning. I'm going to try to make this very quick. And this is concerning statues of people who have made great contributions to this country, but also may have done some things that is not notable. I'm going to read to make sure that it is quick. One second here. History is history. You can manipulate history, but you can't change it. What happened, happened. Removing a statue is not the answer. There should be 2 placards placed on statues of controversy of then and where we are now. The first placard should list the accomplishments of the subject and their condemnations. The second statue should be that of the Pledge of Allegiance, using the plural we. We pledge our allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, but justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have now I believe this is the final panel, Deborah Myers, Maria Suzuki, and Arnold Arnez. And you are? Deborah Myers, okay, you're first. And then you are Maria. And do we have Arnold? Arnold, okay. Deborah, you're up.
Good afternoon to the commission. Thank you for inviting us here. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Deborah Myers, and I live in the borough of the Bronx. I come here today with mixed emotions, and it's almost bringing me to tears. because with the compassion that I have, I just want the commission to know that as a single parent who raised my children in the Bronx, I came from South Carolina, where I was born, and we're talking about the Confederate, we talk about the Yankees. I don't want to hear this anymore, and I don't want this for my children. I don't want this for the young people. I view the statues as works of art. I view all art as works of art. And it is a freedom of expression as we have freedom of speech. I live here in the city of New York, a very diverse city with many cultures, and I respect them all because I love all of my New Yorkers here. And I am an American. I'm not black, I'm not white. I am a human being, and I respect the knowledge that each and every culture brings to our country and to our city. And the works of art are works that are viewed in the eyes of the beholder. It doesn't go by the title of the artwork. It is how I view it or how another person view it. So I've heard history, that's his story. I've heard their story. Let me tell you about my story. My story is that I have a young daughter who is an artist, who grew up here in the Bronx, and she, at a young age, created one little picture that her teacher saved. And that teacher, from that little artwork, she went on to major in fine arts. From coming out of the Bronx, she went to Phillips Academy in Massachusetts, in Andover, Massachusetts. She went on a full scholarship, and that's a very expensive private school, which takes in children from all walks of the world. So she learned about the world, about all human beings. And then she went on to George Washington University, where she studied fine arts. That is her major and that is her degree. Now, many would say, what good can come out of the Bronx? I want you to know that there's a lot of jewels in the Bronx. And just to say that, I just want to say that I want us to appreciate our history in all of its form. And I don't want any of these statues taken from where they are posted or where they are placed right now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maria is up next. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Maria Iovino Swizicki, and I'm an American of Italian ancestry and a proud member of the Sons of Italy. And I'm hoping that the city does not remove the statues of Christopher Columbus. No person or group can or should rewrite the history of the last 500 years. The year 1492 is etched in the minds of all as the year that Columbus discovered the New World, at a time when it took a person of great courage, skill, and perseverance to dare to sail into the unknown. Christopher Columbus dared, and by doing so, he opened the door to the Western Hemisphere. Columbus was an explorer and navigator who successfully opened sea lanes through his challenging crossings of the ocean. He's a 15th century explorer who is now being judged by 21st century standards. We've had presidents who were slave owners, and I don't see anybody removing the statues of the presidents. After the tumultuous years following the mass immigration of Italians who suffered unconscionable bias, a statue honoring Columbus and his discovery of the New World was built with contributions from Italian Americans who sought to demonstrate their love and loyalty to our America. While it is not our goal to invite a public referendum on Columbus as a man living more than 500 years ago, we seek rather to express the importance of his symbolism to an ethnic group that has done nothing less then make this city, state, and country great. We understand that all voices must be heard, and we welcome the opportunity to participate in this meaningful discussion. Thank you, and grazie.
Thank you. Arnold Arnaz will be our last speaker.
To begin, I would like to speak in my indigenous language. Imanay kasangichis, nogapata indígena runay, huajikan runa, sutega Arnaldo, Quechua puni kani. Hello, my indigenous peoples and American people. My name is Arnaldo, and I am an indigenous Quechua. I call as one of a multitude from our city for the statue of Columbus at Columbus Circle to be brought down, and that he be replaced by the indigenous people of our city, the Lenape people. For what is a statue? It is not history only as past, but it's history lived out now. They are heroes of daily reverence, standing high upon a pedestal for the public's gaze. For statues of Christ or the etching of Washington on our coins are not history as dead, but as living heroes whom American institutions choose as worthy of public remembrance. Now we must choose, for Columbus is no hero, not to natives, nor should he be for Italians. To condemn Columbus is to honor the Italian people, for Columbus cannot truly represent Italy's rich history with his vile character, such as in the accounts of Friar Bartolome de las Casas, who witnessed Columbus and his crew's wholesale slaughter of the Taínos, where they snatched suckling infants who were shredded headlong against the rocks for their pleasure and enjoyment. Columbus even mocked Christ himself, for Taínos were hung over a bonfire to, quote, burn them alive 13 at a time, mocking the Last Supper, while the crew called it an honor of our Savior and the 12 apostles. If a Christian's blood should remain cold, do they deserve to partake of Christ's wine? There are figures beyond Columbus worthy of the title hero, such as Carla Capone, an Italian stateswoman who joined the Italian resistance to fight Mussolini in World War II, or Alcide de Gasperi and Altiero Spinelli, two of the European Union's founding fathers that sought to end the history of a divided Europe in constant war. Those who cannot see heroes in 500 years of history either see their people as mediocre or disparage a beautiful history with their ignorance. And I see Italy's rich history as the very opposite of mediocrity. But we must overturn the legacy of genocide for our city to truly honor heroism. Without indigenous peoples, there would be no United States. For in 1988, Congress passed Resolution 331, recognizing the influence of the Iroquois Confederacy that had on the founding fathers, so much so that Iroquois principles were incorporated into the Constitution itself, unquote. And the first U.S. treaty was made with the Lenape people, misnamed Delaware Indians, on September 17, 1778. It recognized the U.S. as having, quote, assumed a trust responsibility and obligation to Indian tribes and their members, unquote. Yes, diplomacy as brotherhood. Let the city of New York be a leader and begin to show the respect Native peoples deserve by first, replacing Columbus with a figure of an indigenous Lenape woman as a symbol, as a grandmother to this land. And second, renaming Columbus Circle to Lenape Circle. For if Columbus is evil, so too is it to have a place named after him. Anchatapuni Agaresekuigi, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for this day of testimony. We have one more day, which is tomorrow in Staten Island. I really appreciate everybody coming out. I want to thank the commissioners who have listened to the testimony. Thanks for everybody for giving your testimony. And this concludes today. Yes, we can applaud each other. Thank you.